Hi guys, it's Elisa with FusionDIY. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to share with you a project that I recently completed, and I'm sure that you've had those projects where you start down one path and things change, sometimes moment by moment. Well, that's what happened here. So, I'll take you through the project and I'll rejoin you back at the end. Enjoy the video.
So here is a picture of the table before it got any work done on it. Had a very 80s looking stencil on it, and it just definitely needed an upgrade. So I gave this table 2 coats of Waverly chalk paint. I believe it was the color Ocean, and I really thought that it was going to match the decoupage paper that I wanted to use on it. So as I said, I gave it 2 coats and I let it dry for 24 hours, and the coverage is actually very good with the Waverly paint. I can't really complain about it for this type of a project, and it did a good job. I also gave the top a coat of paint, and then once that was done, once it dried, I went over the top with a coat of white because I wanted to put my decoupage paper down and I wanted those colors to really stand out. So the white underneath the decoupage paper will definitely do that. So here's the table completely painted, and like I said, the coverage was great. This is the paper that I chose for this table, and I'm looking at it and looking at it and looking at it and realizing that the color really doesn't match the paper. So I went out and I got another paint, and I'm repainting the whole table in this completely different color. So here is the table repainted, and I really liked this color a lot. So now I'm cutting the edges off the decoupage paper, and I am going to be laying out my paper to see how I want to put it down on the table. Initially, when I started this process, I cut out each of the flowers individually and I placed them where I thought they would most naturally fit best on the table. But as I did that, I realized, gosh, there's a lot of cuts on this, and it's going to be hard to match up those cuts. So then I went in a different direction, and I repainted the top of the table, as you can see here, in white. And now I'm taking 2 more sheets of the decoupage paper and I'm tearing the edges so that the edges actually disappear. What I'll do is, after I tear the edges and I decoupage everything down, I'll go back with some paint and blend the edges in with the paint so that it almost fades right into the top of the table. So now you can see I've got all the edges torn, and I'm going to lay down my first piece of decoupage paper. Once I got the pieces in place, I started with And here's how it looked before I started to play around with the
worked
decoupage
in
paper.
sections, and I laid the paper down. This
love the
is
color.
a process, and it's not something that you should rush through. One of the things that I really like about rice paper is that it's got a little bit more durability, so it's a little bit easier to pat it down or to rub it down, just to kind of make the wrinkles disappear. So this is the way I like to lay down decoupage paper, especially when you're dealing with rice paper. I
do this instinctively because a lot of times when I use napkins, they are much more fragile and much more prone to tearing, and so I've just gotten into the habit of tapping the paper down. So now I'm just using those extra pieces that I cut earlier to fill in the edges because I want to cover the entire tabletop with this beautiful decoupage paper. So I'm carefully placing the pieces in sections where I think they will match best. And I also tried to keep the darker pieces of the decoupage paper, the blue, towards the edge so that it was a little bit easier to blend in the edges of the decoupage paper once I started to blend the edges in. So now I'm going to go around the edges of the table and I'm going to remove the excess paper. And you do that by taking your sandpaper and going in only a downward motion to pull that paper away from the top of the table. Once that was done, I went around the edge of the table with the blue paint and I pulled the paint from the table onto the decoupage paper to make that line, that white line left behind by the sanding, disappear. And you can see how, as I go through, that white line goes away and the edge of the paper looks like it's just part of the table now. I'm also going to go in where I created the seams with the decoupage paper, and I'm going to blend the seams in with the rest of the paper using the paint. And here I'm using a tapping motion because I don't want to pull the paint into the flowers, but I do want those two sheets of paper to kind of meld together. I then went back with a combination of some of the white and a very light beige, and I blended those colors together to bring more of that creamy color into the flowers and I also blended some of the flowers where the pages met, the paper met, to eliminate some of those lines as well. I can tell you that this can be a tedious process, so you need to do this when you've got a lot of time and a lot of patience. But in the end, it's all worth it because it really makes your decoupage paper practically seamless, and it looks absolutely beautiful once it's done. So take your time and have some patience. Use the right size brushes, which are tiny ones, and just enjoy the process because, like I said, when it's done, you'll be very thankful that you took the time to do it. And so here is a look at the finished project. It's very hard to determine where the seams were of the paper, right? It just turned out to be such a beautiful table, and I'm thankful that I took the time needed to turn the ugly duckling into a beautiful swan. And then I went over the table with 3 coats of water-based polyurethane because I wanted to protect all the work that I had done, and the 3 coats will really give it a tough finish so that depending upon where the person uses the table, they don't have to worry about anything happening to the decoupage paper or the paint chipping or the paper tearing. And then just to give it a little bit of an aged look, I went over it with some of the Fusion aging wax, and that just added the final touch to the table that it needed to really give it a rustic look. You could see that I'm going over the edges of the paper with the aging wax and wiping away anything excess. And here is the table in the shop, ready for sale.
So what did you think? I think the table turned out beautifully, and no sooner did I finish it, I put it in my shop and it sold within 4 days. So I'm happy that it has a new home. It was a piece that was given to me, and so there was very little investment, and I was happy to make that change to it. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit the notification bell and the subscribe button so that each time I release another video, you'll be notified. Once again, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video. I think the next video is going to be a shop tour because we have some new items here, and look forward to seeing you then. Have a great week. Bye, guys.